These people born in the late 80s and early 90s, you can't do nothing with them. you know, so those of us who are a little older have been frustrated with millennials because of those generational differences.
Mhm.
But you're telling us that we just got to get over it, right? Because y'all are here, you ain't going nowhere, and there's so many of you.
And to add to that, there are so many of us. We are not going anywhere. But more than that, we are your children and grandchildren. Like we're your kids. So how we kind of ended up isn't really altogether on us.
Ladies and gentlemen, Local Matters family, today we have a very special guest. He is Reverend John K. Coar, and I came to know him as Minister of Christian Education at the Good Shepherd Baptist Church in Augusta. How are you doing today, Reverend Coar?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You are the perfect guest for me to have on the show for a number of reasons. One is that the show has a Christian focus, even as we talk about civic issues and community issues. I never lose sight of the fact that we're here to do God's work. So you fit in with that theme, number one. Number two, you are an author. And I know we have some aspiring authors in our Local Matters family who would love to hear more about your book. And third, you have been a loyal follower of the Local Matters podcast since the time that you've been on Augusta. So welcome to Local Matters on this side.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I've been an avid supporter, and I really understand that local and state government politics makes a huge difference. And often we get really locked in on what's going on at the national level and forget that those things have a tendency to trickle up as opposed to down.
That's right. That's right. Our tradition is that we ask our guests to sort of set the tone by telling us a little bit about themselves. So, who is Reverend John K. Coar?
John K. Coar is a son of Georgia, born and raised in Macon, Georgia, now here in the Augusta, Richmond County area, the CSRA, I believe it's called. And so moved here to serve at the Good Shepherd Baptist Church locally educated there in Bibb County, went to Central Fellowship Christian Academy, graduated from there, went to the Fort Valley State University, as we affectionately call it, earning a bachelor's in history, then commissioned into the United States Army, served as a military intelligence officer for about 5 years, and then have answered the call to ministry, completed a Master of Divinity at Morehouse School of Religion at the ITC, where ironically enough, the person that I work with, who is the senior pastor here at the Good Shepherd Baptist Church, his name is actually on my Master of Divinity because he was the chairman of the board for the school that I went to. It's just so providential, the full circle moments that have taken place inside of my life. I currently am in the final year. Pray my strength. All of Local Matters podcast supporters, please, as we attempt to finish the Doctor of Ministry degree there at the Truett Seminary at Baylor University. And I have the distinct privilege of hopefully being one of the final mentees on Reverend Dr. Joel Gregory. And if you're aware of who Joel Gregory is, this is a seminal honor to be included inside of his academic history. So, author, husband of one wife, Dr. Nelson. Hopefully she's watching. Hey, baby doll. We have 2 children, one daughter who will be 16 in January. Again, need prayers, earnest prayers. Jemiah is just brilliant. She is a sophomore there at Northside High School in Warner Robins. Our son Carter Seeley lives in the DMV, and we're immensely proud of both of them. They are developing into great people. Not only that, but I get an opportunity to serve in the United States Army Reserve as a military intelligence officer currently, as well as working for the state of Georgia in community supervision. So my calendar is completely packed. I am so happy to be here with Local Matters and have an opportunity to talk about the book, as well as just recently became the president of JCI3 Ministries, LLC, where we illuminate the word of God to inspire the people of God to make an impact upon the world for God. And we don't have to do it inside the walls of the church.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now I'm going to ask you to translate. And I know in your book you talk a lot about translators. DMV. Please tell everybody what DMV stands for.
Thank you. DMV is an area of the United States that's made up of the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia.
Very good. So that's where your wonderful son is.
Yes.
As you talk some, you mentioned your wife, who actually is shown on the book as almost a co-author. I don't know if you consider her a co-author, but you've got her picture there and you talk about her biographical background as well. Please share a little bit more about who Dr. Nelson is.
Sure thing. One, she is the very efficient editor or primary editor of the work. Two, she is a political scientist. She has a PhD in political science from Howard University, Master of Public Administration from the University District of Columbia, and bachelor's in both English and history from Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. She is only HBCU educated, and she currently runs a consulting firm, Dr. Jan Executes, as well as her name is on the front of this book for all of the wives, all the she says, all the generations of Black women who have edited and co-written and proofread all of the works that we as Black men have come up with over the course of generations, and they haven't gotten their co-author credit. So she was like, no, my name is going on the cover of this book based off of how much work I put in as well as you did.
Okay. It's excellent. And there's one other item about your bio that I know you just forgot to tell people.
You know, I appreciate it. What people need to know? One important fact people need to know. While I was at the Fort Valley State University in the fall of 2002, myself and three other men became members of the single greatest fraternity in all of humanity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, where we learned to be, first of all, servants of all and transcend all.
Excellent. Excellent. I just wanted to throw that out there because I knew you overlooked it.
And we don't feel the need to brag like some other social clubs that exist.
Thanks so much. So the name of the book is
When Wait Your Turn Means No Turn at All.
All right. Where did the idea come from to do this?
That's a very good question. My wife and I, as my friends, one of my friends told us when we initially got married, there's going to be a lot of talking that goes on at your house. And so inside of one of those conversations was the desire of being able to, as millennials, move forward our people and be able to do it from inside of the leadership structures of the best of our institutions, Black church, Black college, Black family, and then Black politics or Black community. And so the concept came from being told, wait your turn. The concept came from, we've gone to the schools, we have the degrees, we have the big pieces of paper, and now we return to these institutions and we're told, hey, listen, someone older, less prepared, probably less educated, but has paid their dues. They have the experience, whereas we have the aptitude and the skills and the know-how. And so they're placed in front of us. They say, well, be a part of their team, but don't have an opinion. We want you at the table, but we really just want you at the table for the sake of saying that we have a young person at the table. You're not really going to be a part of the decision-making process nearly as much as you are just going to be a fixture. And that's something that, as we agreed, we spent too much time and effort. We care too much about our people to then allow that to be the case for so long that when they actually hand over, we talk about this baton pass in the theoretical sense that on a track there are exchange zones for those 4x100 race. That's one complete revolution around the track. There are exchange zones, and if you don't exchange the baton in those zones, then the entire team is disqualified. And so in that same way, in a real sense, we're stating that we're nearing the end of the exchange zone in some of our institutions. And if that exchange is not made in the right amount of time, by the time the baton is passed, then the entire team is disqualified. And in the real sense, our institution will be withering on the vine by the time they get handed over to millennials and Gen Z.
Got it. Got it. Got this idea. You committed to writing at the urging of your wonderful wife, Dr. Sharice Nelson.
Yeah. Thank God for wives.
Thank God for her. So the whole business piece, I know most of the people whose books that I have read recently and I've had on Local Matters have been self-published. Yours isn't. Was there a whole bunch of stuff on the business side that you had to navigate to in order to get this done?
Also a great question, and an emphatic yes. Yes, there were a number of things to work through that I had no clue. I'm a first-time author. My wife, on the other hand, had just recently written a book on the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, 50 Years of Fighting for Equality. And so she kind of walked me through a number of these. Again, thank God for wives. I was completely lost as to how this goes. So we walked through the entirety of this process, the editing, the covers, the font. How do you want this set up? One of her students there at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, designed the cover. He has a design credit on the back of the book. So this has just been incredible, the support, but there's a lot of nuances and deadlines, mostly not self-imposed, mostly helpmate imposed deadlines of, okay, when can you get me this chapter? And then originally, let me just go ahead and front load this. I sent some of the single worst rough drafts of chapters to my wife, and she made chicken salad out of chicken slop. And when I tell you the worst, I mean, huge run on sentences. It was as if I had never written anything in my entire academic life. But we were able to wade through that, professionally edited prior to sending it to Westbow. Westbow Press is a division of Thomas Nelson and Zondervan. Now, Zondervan on my end, as we say, my end and her end, on the academic end, Thomas Nelson is her end. On the Zondervan side is where I've read a bunch of Bibles and commentaries from Zondervan. And so we were able to kind of work through some of that process. And Westbow Press essentially is the minor leagues for Zondervan and Thomas Nelson, so that if When Wait Your Turn Means No Turn at All does well, which hopefully it does, hopefully the listeners will be interested enough to go and grab a copy. But if it does well enough, then Zondervan and or Thomas Nelson would then pick it up and then begin distributing it and advertising for it, marketing, et cetera. And so for the most part, it is that very thin line between having it self-published and having an actual publisher kind of behind you, pushing you. It is a very thin line between the two, but you know, it's just a blessing that we were able to get it done in a timely fashion in the midst of also wedding planning as well as school. So there were a number of different irons in the fire, as well as responsibilities here at GSBC. So there were a number of irons in the fire, but we were able to get it done. And I think one of the key things that I know every single aspiring author and author knows is that it has to be something you're passionate about. If you don't care about the subject matter, then the book, whatever it is going to take forever. But this was a passion project, which I did not know how deeply impassioned I was about this particular subject until I began writing. And then the longest chapter in the book is the chapter I thought I had the least to say about Black family. I didn't really think, I said, man, I'm not a counselor. I don't know anything about Black family. I'm in a Black family. And my wife, again, thank God for wives, she says, just start writing just come up with a concept. And, she said, well, you're a preacher, pray about it. Pray about what to write, then start writing. It's simple. And so that ended up being the longest chapter in the book, because I really did get a concept for the Black family being the most openly hunted institution in all of America, and hunted, breaking it down by Black men, Black women, Black children. And so that ended up being the longest chapter, but it was the deepest dive for me inside the work. So biggest takeaways for authors listening: number one, be impassioned about what it is that you're writing. Number two, set realistic deadlines on when you can get things done. Don't try to rush it. Be realistic. And the third and final thing is get a professional editor. Get a professional editor. There is a professional editor. Thank God for Jaya. She did an amazing job on, and again, that's another one of those. Jaya edited my wife's book on the Congressional Black Caucus and then was kind enough to do this particular work. I hope that answered your question.
It does. I think that's very helpful. I know that there are people out there like myself, really guilty. I've been talking about writing a book for the last 12 or 13 years, and I have some notes here or there, but I have not pulled it together, but I got to find a way to make this happen. And as you said, set some deadlines for myself and just get it out. As you compare the process of writing a book to writing a sermon, what came easier for you?
I only laugh because my wife and I talked about this all through the process, and she was like, "I just don't understand why this is so difficult. Like, you get to make this up. This book is like your set of ideas. You don't have to like translate it. You don't have to use a commentary. These are your thoughts. Why is this so difficult?" And what I came to was having a skeleton like the Bible and commentaries. Having a skeleton is a little bit easier than really scratching the surface on your own thoughts, and those thoughts really being predicated off of some emotions, which as a man, I claim to be unfamiliar with, but have come to discover I'm a far more emotional person than I'd like to admit, and that comes across inside of the book, or at least I hope it does. That these are not just my thoughts; these are thoughts predicated off of feelings and experiences that I've had, and hopefully people get an opportunity to read and hear the heart of myself and my wife inside of this work.
Excellent. And I think my listeners know, but it's been a while since I've had an author on. I don't recommend a book, so I don't bring the authors on unless I know for sure that it's a good one. So, guys, this is a good one. You all need to read it, and we'll get into the heart of what your thesis is here as you discuss millennial, the role of millennials as translators. Please, first though, describe who a millennial is, because we got silent generation and baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. What is a millennial?
Sure. Inside of when wait your turn means no turn at all, we did our best. Again, another one of these conversations that my wife and I had. She says, listen, if you want our parents to read this, you're going to have to give them a glossary. They need an index, they need a glossary, and then you need to have a generational glossary. So we did. And generational glossary defines millennial persons born 1981 and 1996, characterized as loyal to institutions but based on merit, optimistic, ambitious, tech savvy, craving attention, and eager to collaborate. And so that's just kind of an overview on who are these people. Additionally, we are the largest generation born in America. There's no way to avoid.
What year to what year?
Now, the glossary that we have inside the book, 1981 to 1996. And so, yeah, it is just it's a huge generation. It's the biggest one. It's just the biggest one in all of U.S. history. And there's no way to get around us. So I think, a part of the impetus for this was you're probably going to come out better wrapping your arms around us than trying to avoid us.
And that's a good point, because as I think about changes in workplace culture, I know some major shifts have taken place after the pandemic, because of course that's reshaped everything in American life pretty much. But for the pandemic, about the work environment, I mean, I heard somebody say, some people live to work others work to live. That's the only reason they're there is because they gotta make a check, do something with. So I think that shift began with millennials. We looked at the changes and the impact of millennials on the workplace, and even had a conversation with somebody who was working in a jail setting, and we know that's a different setting unto itself, but they were saying, these people born in the late 80s and early 90s, you can't do nothing with them. So those of us who have been frustrated with millennials because of those generational differences. But you're telling us that we just got to get over it, right? Because y'all are here, you ain't going nowhere, and there's so many of you.
And to add to that, there are so many of us. We are not going anywhere. But more than that, we are your children and grandchildren. Like, we're your kids. So how we kind of ended up isn't really altogether on us, right? We're your kids. One of the things that we point out inside the book is I think we can't do anything with them. What's wrong with them comes out of two things. One, lack of generational knowledge on our part and younger people, but predicated off of you all made life a little easier for us because that was a goal you all had. Oh man, I'm not going to do to my kids what my parents did to me, and I'm not going to make their life as hard as mine has been. And so we had it a little bit easier. And so now you're like, man, y'all expect everything to just be easy and come to you. And we're like, yeah, but in a way, you kind of set us up to believe that those were the expectations. And so I think that ends up being a portion of that generational exchange.
And I think you see that the way you framed it in the book is that is something positive. Because I mean, many times it has been framed in a negative way.
It is. And I'm so glad that you said in a positive way. Let me be sure to say this is a positive. This is a good thing. If if the boomers, if Gen X, if silent, if greatest, if those generations of Black people had not been as successful as they have been, we are not even at liberty to ask the question of what's wrong with millennials? What's wrong with y'all? Right? Because we would still be in the grips of Jim and Jane Crow in a far more overt sort of way than the way it is right now. And so I think that it's painted in a negative, and I think that's by design in certain circles, but that's a political conversation to be had elsewhere. But I believe that it can be and should be spun in a positive manner, because if not for your advances, we are not in the place to even have the liberty to say, hey, couldn't we do this differently? Or couldn't this be better? Because if we don't actually have the foundation to stand on, there's no way to say, hey, couldn't we put another floor on this, or couldn't we redesign it? Because there's nothing to redesign. If there is no structure, and there's nothing to look at and say, couldn't we rework this? Couldn't we remodel this? Couldn't this be better? Couldn't we change this? Because there wouldn't be anything to change, remodel, or revamp. It wouldn't exist. And so I think that we don't have an issue, and I hope we do a great job in the book of illustrating this. We as millennials don't have an issue with honoring. And in the back of the book, we have millennial mandates, and one of those millennial mandates at the very, very back, it's set up. I'm a church kid, so it's set up like the Ten Commandments. And one of the millennial mandates is, let us celebrate you as we stand on your shoulders. We don't have an issue with understanding there's no way we get to where we are without standing on the shoulders of giants from the past. It is simply, we want to have the opportunity to stand on your shoulders, to get a little higher, and to be able to celebrate the things that you've done. But that's not altogether possible if one generation won't bend, as King said, if you don't bend, they can't stand on you, can't stand on your back. And if older generations don't bend, we can't stand on your shoulders in order to celebrate you.
As you talked about also in the book, how think what I'm hearing you say is we, previous generations, got you to a point where you can think broader, bolder, and you can build upon the foundation, in essence, that has been put in place by previous generations. Now, Reverend John Coar and Dr. Nelson are very, very ready to build upon that. Do you think that represents the majority of thinking, though, among millennials?
I don't think it represents the majority of any generation, frankly. I think that when we talk about any generation, there's a portion of every generation that's just okay with the status quo, whatever that looks like. They're just really looking to survive from day to day. And I think it is incumbent upon the outliers of every generation to call out to the outliers in previous generation and call out to the outliers in the next generation so that we move the collective forward. I don't believe that everybody's set to be a chief or a leader in that particular way. I think every generation has those leaders, those chieftains who are set to move the group by way of winning the confidence of the members of that group and the folks in the other generations that have called out to that kindred leadership ability, that kindred forward thought. And so I believe wholeheartedly that there are Gen Xers and boomers. There are, the elders among us. There are also millennials and Gen Z members who are that remnant, who are that exception, and they say, hey, listen, we have the opportunity to collaboratively move the collective of our people forward. And I think that's one of the things that hopefully people get out of this particular work, because that's one of the biggest emphasis. So I don't believe that the majority of millennials or the majority of any generation care enough to really want to say, hey, listen, let's invest the time, let's invest the perseverance and the patience, the resilience that it takes to try and move a collective forward.
Reverend Coar, one of the things that you suggest, even by the title itself, and then several times during the book, when wait your turn means no turn at all, you talk about being invited to the table to discuss solutions, issues, and to make a better community for all of us. We're in the point in this country and worldwide, quite frankly, where you look at problems, affordable housing, homelessness, crime, gangs, poverty. The list goes on and on of lots of problems that need solutions. Do you think it's reasonable that folks of your generation, those born between 1981, 1996, could present some solutions that maybe have not been thought of yet to those sorts of seemingly intractable issues?
I do. I would say yes. With I think our generation has some major things to lend to finding solutions. I don't think that they're going to be like completely original ideas. I really think that they're going to be modern revisions or variations of great ideas from the past to solve problems that have plagued us and still plague us, but not without the wisdom necessary from boomers and other generations. But that wisdom has to be given out, I always say, with intergenerational appreciation and some reciprocity in mentorship. I think the concept that you can't tell millennials anything isn't necessarily true. It's a matter of the model of mentorship and leadership has changed. Before, in the very Greco-Roman sort of way, as well as Judeo-Christian sort of way, it was sit at the mentor's feet, sit at the sensei's feet, and just be glad that you're there and take all the morsels that are pouring off of his or her lips. The model has changed in that we want a mutual reciprocity inside of mentorship. We want you to understand that we bring a value to the mentor-mentee relationship, just like we understand you bring a great value to it as well. I think that that's an adjustment that older generations, in some cases, are unwilling to make because they don't want the model. They don't want the model to change, one, or they don't see the value in having. They've been dying to be mentor so that they could be in the in the seat of mentor. Like, you should be listening to all that I'm saying and taking it in. You shouldn't have an opinion necessarily on what I'm saying. But as we allude to in the book, even our upbringing lends itself to a reciprocity, in so much that our parents asked us, where do you want to go for vacation? It wasn't like, hey kids, we're going here, we're going there. It was, hey kids, we're going to have a family meeting. I'm a living witness to this. Hey kids, we're having a family meeting about where would you all like to go for summer vacation, or what would you all like to do during summer vacation? And so we're used to, while honoring the people who are in authority, also being able to have our opinions not only heard, but having them be actioned on, right? I'll never forget, my youngest sister was, she couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. And she got to decide that we were going to Disney World for spring break. And I was just like, she's the youngest person in here. And yet, because she was the squeaky wheel, they were like, all right, well, Orlando, here we come. And so that's the type of environment that we've been bred in, that we've grown up in. And this is one thing that I wanted to make absolutely clear. It's inside of one way to turn means no turn at all. I think that this lends itself to the question of millennials and how we see ourselves in solving problems. As a member of the millennial generation, I've lived in a world driven by innovation, making the world that we live in smaller and faster. This reality has caught many people of the silent generation and those baby boomers looking back on their lives and gazing ahead toward the future of a nation they will probably not live to enjoy. The world that they see is so very different than the world in which they came of age, and they ponder what the world has come to. They are peeking into that future and don't like what they see. This is happening in concert with Generation X and Millennials, trying to get them to loosen the reins of leadership for our hallowed institutions, vying to have them trust us enough to pass the leadership baton of our people forward. All of this knowing that we will need their wisdom and support for such a Herculean effort. For Herculean efforts such as trying to solve food deserts and racially motivated crimes, voter suppression. 60th anniversary of the March on Washington took place, and we're still in a really bad spot politically as a people. And so I think that the wisdom from former generations, and this is that translation piece that runs as a thread throughout the entirety of the book, is that Generation X is the bridge. They are the bridge between boomers, which is a huge generation, and millennials, a monstrous generation in and of itself. And so they're the bridge, but we are translators. Here's what that means. Our grandparents or great grandparents were silent. We unmuted them, because by the time we came along, we were precocious enough to ask, and they had gotten to the age where they said what they wanted to say, and they just answered our questions. There was no reservations. There was no embarrassment. They just told us what it was. One of the examples that we use inside the book is the car is ringing and is telling us where to go. It's just really an example of a millennial, myself, a member of the silent generation, my grandmother who was born in 1916, my father who is a boomer born in 1947, and my sister calls. My sister calls, the Bluetooth speakers pick up the phone call, and my grandmother is shocked because she remembers cranking a car, like getting in the front of it and literally using a crank for the Model T. And so now the car's ringing, and her thing is the car is ringing. And to her knowledge, the telephone went from being something that was completely novel and an operator had to plug you in, to a cordless phone, to a corded phone, to a corded phone, to a cordless phone, now a cellular phone, and now the car is ringing. And so her situational understanding of communication that day was beginning to be altered and changed. And that was a decision point for her. Like, okay, am I going to accept this and embrace it, or am I going to resist this and just completely shun it? Well, there's nothing she could do about it. The car was literally ringing at the time. My father, on the other hand, who worked as an electronic warfare mechanic on F-15, 16, 18 at Robins Air Force Base for over 40 years, he understood GPS. He understood the concept, but to be able to see turn by turn directions in real time on the heads up display in my car, he was just blown away. And so in that moment, I got a chance to translate. Okay, grandmother, communication has changed. The phone has gone through evolution. Dad, the way you look at a map has changed. It's not something you put in the glove box now. It's on the heads up display, and it will tell you in 500 feet, turn right onto blah, 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 right? And so being able to do that work is what I believe the millennial generation has an opportunity to do in a number of arenas and a number of ways for the best of our people.
Thank you for that, because that really does get to the heart of the book. In the book, you talk about family. You mentioned earlier that being your longest chapter. You talk about community, which is what I want to get to at the end. But you also talk about, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't hit on, where we are. You mentioned millennials now, church attendance is low. As a gospel minister, how does that make you feel?
So I have had the distinct honor and privilege and pleasure of teaching a quick seminar on reaching millennials and Gen Z inside of both the National Baptist Convention as well as our state convention here in Georgia. And one of the biggest kind of tenets of that has been three things. I'm Baptist. Three things. I got 3 points. The very first one is that we care about our relationship with God. We love God. We love the institution of church. Interestingly enough, I know it may not seem like it, but millennials, we were raised in church. And that brings me to the second thing. The second thing is this. We just want to know that the organizations and the institutions that we are part of are having lasting impact. We don't necessarily need titles and pins for how many years of service we've been doing. We want to make sure that what we're involved in is having impact and lasting impact upon the world in which we live. One of the biggest things, this is 2A, one of the biggest things that we as millennials in ministry really have to focus on, we have to make church an asset again. For generations, Black people have identified by church. There used to be a time where when you introduced yourself or people got to know you, one of the things that they wanted to know about you was, what church are you a member of? I know where you live. I know where you work. I know your name. Who are your people? That's cool. That's all great. After that, or very close to that, was, hey, what church do you go to? Who's your pastor, right? And the necessity, the asset view of church has decreased in our generation, and we want to be able to reclaim that. And one of the ways to do that is number 3. I always think about this. It is the I say 5 C's of reaching millennials and Gen Z. 1, we have to level. You have to level with us in empathy. Love on us is the biggest thing. If we know that you care, then we care what you know. If we know that you care, then we care what you know. Do life with us. If you do life with us outside of church, go to a game, play cards, play games, try to do the Tamia line dance, Tamia line dance with us, those sorts of things end up being big. We always want to lift Jesus and level with people. But one of the biggest things is you don't lose currency being honest with us. You have to be able to bring some authenticity and honesty to relationship with millennials and Gen Z, because if you tell us who you were, then we're looking at who you've become. If you tell us who you were, then we're looking at who you become, because one of the biggest things that we always talk about, my wife and I always talk about, is like, there's no reason for them to act like they've never been where we've been. If you tell us how you got there, I think, and this is inside the book, older generations believe you shouldn't care how the bacon is made when it's on your plate. It's on your plate. Why do you care how it was made? our generation and younger generations, we want to know how the pig got on our plate. We want to see the gruesome nature of the factory that made this bacon that's on my plate. It's not going to stop me from eating it. I just want to know what the process was. And pulling back that curtain and bringing us into that process, one is not going to hurt you or your witness to us. It's actually going to help, because when you identify with us with empathy, we have the opportunity to really begin that intergenerational and that exchange. We get to translate because we speak Gen Z and Alpha. Those are our kids. But we also speak Boomer and Gen X and Silent because we came up, we're the last of the go outside and play generation, as I described in chapter number 1, Thank God on Millennial. But we have a working understanding. And one of the things is, like I said, being precocious enough to unmute the silent generation. I was precocious enough to ask my grandmother one Sunday after church. I said, Grandmother, I know what all right means, because they taught us in school, all right means mediocre is. So every Sunday, almost every Sunday, the preacher says, ain't God all right? Ain't he all right? Now,
I heard you say that.
I have, but I have, based off of this gem that my grandmother, Flora Claire Robinson Brown, dropped on me. She said, baby, listen, he's not saying that God is ALRIGHT, all right, like mediocre. The preacher is actually saying God is all ALL right, as in every way God is right, is just. And I said, well, why didn't anybody else tell me that? She said, well, I don't know, but everybody else just knows. And so I think that that's one of the chief issues. And I do not want anybody to leave Local Matters podcast without knowing this. When wait your turn means no turn at all. JCI3 Ministries and Reverend John K. Coar and Dr. Sharice J. Nelson want every single person at every single generation to understand. Some people don't understand. There is a language of church that some people just don't understand, and we think they should come in understanding it. No, they don't. We have to explain these things. Case in point, I did not know why they line hymns. I just thought they were singing slow. Well, because it was illegal for enslaved African people to be able to read and write, there were only a few people who did know how to do it, the deacon or the reverend. So they're lining this hymn so that we as African people, because that's what we like to do, worship in community, could do that. So they say, well, what a friend we have in Jesus, and it's the call and response. Well, as literacy became more rampant among us, we could read the hymnal, we could read music. We've always been a musical people. And now, with the words being on the screen, we have no idea why we have hymnals. We have no idea why they line hymns. We don't understand the call and response. We don't understand the celebration of the hoop made famous inside of Black Baptist Circle. The hoop is really a conjure. It is gathering together the collective spirits of these people in the call and response to celebrate the concept of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's why we talk about it every single week, is because we're trying to galvanize all of these people's spirits together, conjure them into this frenzy, so to speak. And the representative of that frenzy is the preacher who is celebrating, and that's how the hoop comes about. And everybody and younger people were like, why are you yelling at me? Everything was great until you started yelling at me. Or my daughter says, that thing you do when you're talking and singing at the same time. And so, it's concepts like that we have to explain. We have to explain business understandings that Black people have from previous generations that still work, right? We have to put out those leadership concepts that still work, right? Those small grassroots organizations like SCLC and NAACP and the National Council of Negro Women, all of these grassroots organizations that are now huge, right? All began because those leadership concepts of galvanizing people around a common goal and purpose have not been passed down. And I think that previous generations have a misunderstanding that they come in understanding. We don't. We may come in with smartphones, and we may come in with smart mouths, and we may come in with education, but we didn't come in with a working understanding of how it's been done. But I do understand also that even with sharing that understanding intergenerationally, there has to be a divorce from some methods that don't work. And I think that there's some marriages to methods that older generations have, and even we may have as millennials, that need to be divorced. We need to preside over divorces from methods.
Okay, and I'm going to use that as a segue into your chapter on community and Black citizenship.
Sure.
You said that, the leadership probably needs a makeover. And you asked some questions about who really are our next generation of leaders? Where do they come from? How do we build them? And that reminded me of a couple things, one of which I want to focus on here today because it's close to the theme of church. I always, in conversation with people ask me, well, what will it take to make our local governments more functional? And I would always say, you've got to elect the right people. And to elect the right people, you got to find the right people to run for office. So there's got to be development of a pipeline of leadership that really can take us to where we need to go. And I also thought in the context of that cross between church, civic engagement, and political leadership, Operation Push, Reverend Jesse Jackson,
Right.
Rainbow Coalition. He started that as Operation Breadbasket, I think in Chicago in the 60s when he was a youngster. He was that next generation of leadership at that time. And after all of these years, I guess probably close to 50 years, I'd have to see the exact definition. It probably has been about 50 years. He has now handed over the reins of leadership to someone who is in my generation. That's Reverend Frederick Haynes of Dallas, Texas, I believe. And Reverend Haynes, if you've been paying attention, has been talking about sort of a social gospel for many, many years. So now he has the opportunity not just to pastor his church, but to also take over a national organization that has established a reputation for itself over the past 50 years. And I noticed, Reverend Jackson was born in the early 40s, makes him silent generation. And I think Reverend Haynes is closer to the tail end of the baby boom.
Baby boomers. Yes, ma'am.
There is a handover. It is a generational shift from the standpoint that Reverend Haynes is close to the age of Reverend Jackson's children. But Reverend Haynes is still in a generation a good bit older than yours, still old enough to be your dad, probably. So do you think there is the shift? Is that enough of a shift? How do you feel about that shift? Do you think that not just in terms of Operation Push and the Rainbow Coalition, but just generally, when we look at leadership for larger organizations that have a high profile, should we be looking at boomers, or is that a gradual move? I mean, how do you see that?
Wow. That is a rich question. So let me start at the beginning. Brother in faith and fraternity, Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III is not only a more than capable preacher and pastor, but I'm sure he's going to do an amazing job heading up our. He is one. He's an adaptive thinker, and I don't think he is. I don't think that he is so stuck on being the answer to all the questions, right? Or having the answer to all the questions, that he's not willing to reach into other generational pools and find that person. I think it's organizational dependent. Some organizations, they need a gradual generational step from silent to boomer, maybe even mix in Gen X and then move to millennial. Some industries are dramatic in that they'd be able to move directly to a millennial. The tech world is one of those places and spaces where I think that sort of gradual move may not even be feasible based off of how much innovation millennials are bringing to the table. There's one excerpt you mentioned, Black leadership makeover. I think that one of the lines in here is, the future of Black leadership must expand to include all the generations. Although the fight hasn't changed, the battlefield has changed. Previous generations were not prepared to fight in the land of emojis, hashtags, and reels. Yet those inside Gen X and millennials are set to lead our people and prevent us from falling victim to a more sophisticated and higher tech foe. This foe hides behind algorithms, the merit and objectivity to muzzle and eventually silence our Black political voice. I think that future Black leadership inside of organizations of all sizes and kinds is going to have to be younger, female. And inside of civic organizations, I think that it's going to have to expand because all of the parts are going to end up being very, very useful to include those whom we don't agree with their lifestyle. I think that, like people inside of the LGBTQIA plus community may in fact be valuable assets inside of our advancement because politically they're tied into a pool of very influential people that we just normally aren't.
So, inclusion.
And I think that diversity ends up being something that we want, as my grandmother used to call it, other people. We want other people to embrace diversity, but we as a people don't want to embrace diversity. The diversity of thought does not mean that you've lost your moral ground. It just means that you understand that there's a panoramic view that needs to be had and you don't have it. You have an angle, but you don't have the 360.
Got it. Are y'all gonna force your way into getting your turn?
A number of those instances and organizations are not set up for that. They're not set up for hostile takeovers or coups. I think that one of the worst things that could happen is the thought that we are coming for a hostile takeover. Because that's not the purpose. I think we want collaborative cooperation. We don't want a hostile takeover. So yes, a hostile takeover is not our aim. I think that, how can I put this? Well, I like the Bible a little bit. I think that there wasn't any example of hostile takeovers hasn't worked for God's people. And I believe Black people are God's people, bottom line up front. And I also believe Moses and Joshua didn't have a hostile takeover. And Joshua to the judges didn't have a hostile takeover. Anytime there's been a successful, I know America's kind of foreign to this at this point. Anytime there's a friendly, cohesive exchange of power or transfer of power or authority, then it works best for the organization and the collective. I believe wholeheartedly that our foreparents, our great grandparents, our grandparents, and even all of the present generations now want what's best for Black people. I just think we differ on how to get there. And again, it's a matter of, if you show us your methods, expect us to show you ours, right? You may not like them, you may not agree with them, but there is merit in being able to see it from someone else's point of view.
That is such a great point about biblical history not being filled with hostile takeovers. That is, the Bible in biblical days, they weren't going to the nuclear option.
Yeah.
That is such a good point that I had not thought of. A couple things before we close. One, I asked this question: is there anything else that you want our Local Matters family to know about the book that you've written?
So, well, I want every single person under the sound of my weak voice to know, at whatever point in time you're hearing this, when wait your turn means no turn at all, is set to be a conversation starter. This is not a book that you are to keep to yourself. This is a book that the concepts should be spread abroad. I want parents to ask children, is this how you feel? If you're a parent of a millennial, read the book and then ask as you're reading, hey, is this how y'all think? Or is this how y'all feel? Millennials, when you read it, have the discussion with aunts and uncles, grandparents and parents. I believe this could be beneficial for teenage readers or young college readers to be able to delve into the minds of millennials, because you're going to end up working with and for us inside of your life and career, whatever your career may be. You're going to bump into us. That there's no way around us. And so I would ask, have the conversations, be open to hearing those pieces of information you don't like, and being able to dispense transparently, I experienced this. For instance, I did not know that my grandmother had met Mary McLeod Bethune until she saw a picture of her in a history book and was like, "Oh yeah, that lady came trying to raise money for this school in Daytona. She came to Macon, and we cooked plates, and people bought plates to support her school." Her She said it. Yeah, she was trying to start this little school in Daytona, and I was like, "Grandmother, like that's an actual college now. That's a university." She was like, "Oh, well, I guess it worked." So being able to unearth those things about the people that we don't hear about, right? The people that worked behind the scenes. I did not know how incredibly impactful Essie Mae McIntyre, the founding pastor of Good Shepherd, was. A Black woman starting a Baptist church in 1940 is completely unheard of. And for it to have thrived all of these years and only have had one other pastor in its entire history is also unheard of. In Baptist churches, two pastors in 83 years in a Black Baptist church it's virtually unheard of. And so not knowing who those people are, not hearing about it, share. I would also have people know that there will not Millennials' purpose is not a hostile takeover. We are not trying to put the world and organizations and leadership and institutions into a chokehold to make you have the baton of leadership. That's not the end game. The end game is we want you to see our value. We want to be wanted. We're starved for attention. We want to be wanted. We want you to appreciate us and say, "Hey, listen, we know that you bring value to this institution, to this endeavor, to this organization. So here, we're trusting you, but inside of trusting you, we want to give you some words to the wise. We want to give you a heads up on what you're going to have to deal with." And we appreciate that because we don't know. Like there's a lot of things we do know, but there's some things we just don't know by way of having a lack of experience. But the very last thing that I would say about what I want people to get out of this is just I want people to really hear the heart of a millennial, well, a couple of millennials who understand how important our people are and how absolutely diabolical the world is going after our people. I really want people to leave this book reading experience of When Wait Your Turn Means No Turn at All, understanding there is a diabolical plan after the future of Black people in America. And whatever generation you're in, if you care about our people, which even if you just care about your kids and your family, you'll be able to really hear the heart of it used to be Jim and Jane Crow, and then it was redlining, and now it's gentrification, right? It's the same concept. People don't want to live near us. Bottom line up front. So, it's those sorts of things. It is going after HBCUs. It is voter suppression because that dictates so many other things inside of our nation. And so I really want people to leave with conversation, leave with an understanding of how much millennials actually do care, and also leave with understanding that we all have a responsibility and an opportunity to do something great for the collective of all Black people.
Excellent, excellent. Where do people buy this book?
So you can get your copy of When Wait Your Turn Means No Turn at All. You can get it on Amazon. You can go to barnesandnoble.com. You can go to Amazon. All you have to do is type in either my last name, Coar, and it should come up because I don't believe there's any other Coars writing books. But you can also look for When Wait Your Turn. When Wait Your Turn Means No Turn at All on Amazon or on Barnes and Noble. And if you can't find it there, please, please, please do me a big favor. Lean in. JCI3Ministries.com. JCI3Ministries.com. There's a link there, and you can find all kinds of weekly content from myself, as well as sermon clips, and you can find a way to get a link for the book. But stick around, look at the page, check out different random pictures, and you can go to my Instagram and follow me on Instagram as well. And so, again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Let's talk about this passion project, and thank you again.
Thank you. This has been Reverend John K. Coar. He is Minister of Christian Education at the Good Shepherd Baptist Church, and he is the author of When Wait Your Turn Meets No Turn at All. Be blessed, and thanks so much for being with us.